We're going to start with the Trump tax bill that is fighting to get through the House, that is fighting to get through the Senate, that is just fighting to become legislation. Now, this is effectively his landmark, and I say landmark in the worst way possible, 2017 tax bill, but with additional spendings allocated to immigration and defense, as well as targeted cuts towards Medicaid, SNAP, food stamps, various welfare programs to the tune of like multiple hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, this bill is particularly wishy washy because there are some Republicans who are cowards and are bowing to Donald Trump on this bill. And then there are a handful of Republicans, Trump calls them grandstanders, who don't want to pass this bill because it will hurt their constituents. We're going to hear reporting on ABC in regards to
We get the
this.
latest now on President Trump's budget bill, with Republicans still divided on the mix of tax cuts and spending cuts. Chief White House correspondent Mary Bruce has the latest. Good morning, Mary.
George, good morning. Well, after a marathon session that lasted throughout the night, House Republicans have finally advanced the president's bill. It does now head to the House floor for a full vote. That could happen as soon as today, but this fight is far from over. The president this morning trying to convince those Republican holdouts to fall in line. Overnight on Capitol Hill, a marathon effort to advance the president's economic agenda.
This is an historic moment. We believe it's a generational opportunity to reclaim the American promise, to renew the American spirit, and restore America's greatness.
If Republicans are so proud of what is in this bill, then why are you trying to ram it through in the dead of night?
The package of tax cuts and immigration spending now officially.
No one is debating, or at least no honest actor is debating the insidious nature of this tax bill. It sucks. It straight up fucking sucks for every low and middle income earner that lives in the United States of America. This serves no benefit to anybody. Yes, there may be tax cuts for lower and middle income earners, but there are also tax cuts for the wealthy, which means that inevitably lower middle income earners are going to wind up paying more anyway. You cannot subsidize tax cuts for the rich without tacking on consequences to lower and middle income earners, whether this be by way of the tariffs that Trump is fighting so vehemently for, that's going to increase the cost of living. The bill does not mention anything specific in terms of Medicaid and Medicare cuts and food stamp cuts. Or at least I don't think it does, but it lays the groundwork for it. And Republicans are going to try to slash these social services by any means possible. There is another cohort of Republicans in Congress who don't want this to pass because they are deficit hawks. And this is inevitably going to add to the deficit because it always does. You cannot add on spending in any way, shape, or form without contributing to the deficit. The difference is, for me, I don't give a fuck about the deficit. The deficit it's a non-issue. However, I would look to combat any increase in the deficit by taxing corporations and the wealthy at a higher rate. There are a couple of Republicans who talked about this because who mentioned this, but of course the Republican Party is not going to do that because they, much like virtually every other fucking public servant in Washington D.C., is bought and paid for by not only corporations but the mega wealthy as well.
Called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, still far from a done deal. The president facing holdouts in his own party.
I think we're going to get everything we want, and I think we're going to have a great victory.
On the Hill yesterday, Trump personally pressuring Republicans to get behind the bill, which would extend the 2017 Trump tax cuts, lift the federal income tax on tips and overtime work, provide $50 billion to resume construction of Trump's border wall, and slash federal spending by more than $1.5 trillion, including cuts to Medicaid, which would leave an estimated 8 million Americans without health insurance over a decade. But for several
people are gonna fucking die, man. There's no other way to get around it. People are going to fucking die if this tax bill comes to pass. In Trump's first term, there were like 2.7 million people, I think it was, that lost health insurance over his 4 years. There's like 2.5 or 2.3 million people that would lose healthcare coverage in New York State alone if these Medicaid cuts come to pass. That is how they're going to reduce this is how they're going to reduce federal spending. They're going to reduce federal spending by eliminating the already nearly non-existent social services that exist to help lower and middle income earners. It is insidious. It is disgusting. Anybody in Congress who votes to advance this is a fucking coward and should be shamed publicly by their constituents for directly working in opposition to what is best for the people that live in their states and in their districts.
Line Republicans, it doesn't go far enough. They're demanding even steeper cuts. Behind closed doors, sources tell us the president warned Republicans don't expletive with Medicaid. Trump telling Republicans to get on board or risk a primary challenge, warning that anyone who won't fall in line, quote, wouldn't be a Republican much longer.
Anybody that didn't support it as a Republican.
Getting back to the Medicaid thing, because Medicaid and Social Security for many decades was a red line for lawmakers in DC. You do not fuck with two of the most popular social services that are offered to people. Social Security is overwhelmingly popular, and for good reason, because it is effective at keeping senior citizens out of poverty. Now, there is nothing in this bill that targets Social Security, but we know from Republicans' previous actions that they would like to take a cut at Social Security as well. Medicaid is also popular, and Medicaid would be far more popular. I don't have the poll numbers off the top of my head for Medicaid, but it would be way more popular if it was funded properly and allowed to operate at peak efficiency. Regardless, Medicaid is essential for so many different for so many Americans from many different socioeconomic backgrounds, whether they're elderly folks, whether they're disabled, whether they're fucking children who have been orphaned, whether they're single, whether it's single parents. There are going to be tremendously adverse consequences to cutting Medicaid. And those adverse consequences are going to disproportionately affect people who live in Trump states and Trump districts, which is why it is particularly sinister that Republicans from those states are either voting for this bill or saying that this bill doesn't go far enough.
I would consider to be a fool.
But several Republicans still not sold.
Where are you on this bill?
I'm leaning maybe. I liked what he said about the Medicaid.
Did the president change your vote, sir?
He did a great job.
Did he change your vote?
He did a great job.
Now, with a narrow margin in the House, Speaker Johnson can only afford to lose 3 votes. And even if he does ultimately get this through the House, the bill still faces a real uphill battle over in the Senate, where the legislation is expected to face major changes. The bottom line here, George, this morning, there is still a long road ahead.
There is. And yesterday, Mary, the president also announced his intention to pursue a missile defense system.
Yeah, George, look, we know that the president has long praised Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system. It's exactly what he wants to create here, what he's calling the Golden Dome missile defense system. He's unveiling plans for this ambitious project, predicting he can get it done by the end of his term. The president has said that this was his suggestion, not the commander's, but he says they are now on board with this. He's predicting it will cost billions, but the Congressional Budget Office says it could cost more than $500 billion.
And
George.
of course, Congress would
That psychotic shit is one of the other stories that we're not going to cover today, just because it's so like, I want to cover it because it is so fucking silly and so asinine and so ridiculous, but there are far more pressing things that I have to get to. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to do like a 2.5, 3-hour show for you guys today. This bill is set up for failure, I think. As George Stephanopoulos and this reporter were just saying, there is a very long road to go, because you do have some Republicans who do have spines, believe it or not, who won't vote for this. I believe Thomas Massey is one of the grandstanders that Trump talks about. There's probably going to be a few people in the Senate as well. I have a feeling that Rand Paul would not vote for this if when it does eventually if it makes its way to the Senate, because he understands the value of those social services, Medicaid and food stamps, and he also doesn't really he him and Trump just butt heads economically sometimes. Potential impacts of the one big beautiful bill. More than an estimated 8 million recipients could lose Medicaid coverage, according to the CBO analysis requested by House Democrats. Republicans say they're targeting able-bodied adults and undocumented immigrants, but other beneficiaries could also be impacted. Able-bodied adults is way too fucking wide of a net to cast. These are people, for example, like an able-bodied adult is someone who is capable of working, but what if they're not able to find work right now? What if they're a college graduate with a 4-year degree and on the job hunt, and after they've been denied 879 times, they're doing DoorDash or Uber to make ends meet? Like, that is someone who needs Medicaid because there's no other way for them to get healthcare coverage, because we live in the medieval era where healthcare is still not guaranteed as a human right. Undocumented immigrants, this one is particularly funny because undocumented immigrants receive on average the same Medicaid benefits as naturalized citizens, and in some cases they don't even receive health coverage because they're afraid to go to the fucking hospital because ICE might be there waiting for them. This is just pure. These actions by the Republicans are so sinister. I want this to resonate with you guys. They are indirectly or directly going to kill people because of this legislation. Cut SNAP food assistance by roughly $230 billion over 10 years, narrowing participation in the program, servicing roughly 1 in 8 Americans each month. Again, these are low-income people who desperately need this help. There are children who rely on this. There are children who rely on this program. It extends the 2017 Trump tax cuts. As we know, nearly all of the benefits of that legislation went to the 1%. In that original bill, the tax rates for the bottom 99%, or I don't remember if it was the bottom 90% of earners or the bottom 90% of earners, those tax cuts were only short term, and they would sunset this year. They sunset in 2025, actually. The tax cuts for the 1%, for the highest earners, were permanent. They were permanent. Fulfills Trump's campaign promises of no taxes on tips and no taxes on overtime work. I'm kind of confused on this because in the bill, I didn't read the bill. Like, okay, I'm not that big of a fucking politics nerd, pardon me. I didn't read the entirety of the bill, but I could have sworn that there was no mention of that in this bill. And it's strange because the Senate, we will cover this story, the Senate unanimously voted on a no tax on tips legislation just today. So I'm a little confused by this, admittedly. Provides $50 billion to renew construction of Trump's border wall. Absolutely fucking insane. Commits roughly $150 billion in defense spending for shipbuilding and the Golden Dome missile defense system. There's so many other ways in which this money could be better allocated, whether it be towards expanding already existing social services or to just create new initiatives to tackle like the homelessness crisis, the drug addiction epidemic, create mental health task forces in the largest population centers so that way they are better equipped to deal with the worsening conditions. You could use this to fucking build affordable housing or recommission abandoned buildings to be suited for affordable housing. But no, instead, Donald Trump wants to build a goddamn dome that would zap missiles from outer space. Motherfucker, who is launching missiles here? Who is launching missiles at the United States? The reason that Israel has a fucking Iron Dome is because they have people shooting missiles at them because they are destabilizing the entire fucking region and have been destabilizing the entire region for the better part of 70 fucking years. Why should we allocate $150 billion to this bullshit vanity project? It makes no fucking sense. There is proposed Medicaid changes under this bill, new work requirements on able-bodied Medicaid recipients 19 to 64 who don't have dependents. States must conduct Medicaid eligibility redeterminations at least every 6 months for all recipients. As we know, people are going to lose their health care during this changeover period because they are proposing these changes while simultaneously trying to restrict funding to Medicaid, which means that the Medicaid offices are going to struggle to process all of these claims. Removes undocumented migrants from Medicaid eligibility. This is especially cruel. Increases copays for Medicaid recipients who make more than the federal poverty limit. Increases the required Medicaid paperwork for income and residency verification. It's just making everything so unnecessarily intense. It's making everything so unnecessarily annoying. Like we are so cooked in the healthcare department where not only are we now being extorted or every year being extorted by our insurance companies, the government is now basically a fucking mafia when it comes to the healthcare. When it comes to the healthcare system, they are a new Don. They are a new capo in the healthcare mafia by making it significantly harder for people to obtain basic services. SNAP cuts. The bill tightens eligibility requirements for SNAP, what used to be called food stamps, which helped roughly 42 million low-income people buy groceries in 2024. Adults aged 55 to 64 and children would face additional work requirements to qualify for SNAP benefits. You hear that, kids? You're going to the fucking mines. You are going to the mines and into the citrus fields so that way you can qualify for assistance to buy your goddamn food. Also at a time when the Republicans are trying to constrict what qualifies as or what food items are eligible for SNAP. The bill also shifts some SNAP costs to the state. The program is currently 100% federally funded. This bill requires states to share at least 5% of SNAP benefit costs starting in 2028. This is something that red states are not going to be able to do. Red states do not have the capacity to fund these kinds of programs. Do you know why? Because the red states are subsidized by blue states when it comes to federal income dollars. States like California, New York, Minnesota, Massachusetts pay more in federal funding than they receive. The surplus goes to states like Louisiana and Mississippi and Oklahoma. The only red state that doesn't take in more welfare than it receives is Utah. This is not something that I have an issue with. I don't care that red states receive funding that they desperately need. If Mississippi needs more money to just like keep the infrastructure from deteriorating, I'm okay with that. But I am not okay with shifting the burden, the financial burden of this program onto states that will not be able to afford it. No tax on tips. This addition to the bill helps Trump fulfill one of his major campaign promises, exempting workers who receive tips from paying federal income taxes on them as long as they make less than $160,000 a year. This would expire at the end of 2028 after the next presidential election. Makes tax cuts from the 2017 Cuts and Jobs Act permanent. That fiscal hawks complain add trillions of dollars to the deficit over the next decade. Does not include a tax increase on the wealthiest earners, which is why it's also going to increase to the deficit. if you want to shrink the current deficit, like if you are a deficit hawk, you should be the loudest advocate for a baseline corporate profit tax, which we had under Joe Biden, and also for every other fucking tax that you could that exists, whether it's a wealth tax, an estate tax, an asset tax, or whatever, like whatever the fuck. That's probably more so like a wealth tax, but like more capital gains taxes, just overall more taxes on the 1%, because you're generating extra revenue that you could put towards the deficit. Creation of MAGA savings accounts for children. The bill would create so-called MAGA savings accounts for parents to open for their children. The contribution limit for any taxable year is $5,000. It includes a pilot program to start the accounts with $1,000. Yeah, I'm sure there wouldn't be any fucking stipulations for this, because there are eligibility requirements for literally every other fucking bill that these goons are looking to advance. Like, you would not qualify for a MAGA savings account if you're a registered Democrat, or you wouldn't be able to qualify for a MAGA savings account if you live in New York City or if you live in a blue district. Salt cap changes. I really don't give a fuck about the salt cap. I mean, I do. The people who benefit the most from the salt cap are those who earn like more than $200,000 a year. But fuck the salt cap. Like, I don't give a shit about that. More money for border security enforcement. Nothing really else to cover here. Bill includes $4 billion to hire 3,000 new Border Patrol agents as well as 5,000 new customs officers. This is because ICE, Border Patrol, the immigration enforcement agencies do not have the resources to conduct Donald Trump's immigration agenda without the cooperation from local law enforcement. And there is potentially the chance of local law enforcement not cooperating with ICE as they conduct their Gestapo-style raids.